It is pretty well-rounded, but there are areas when it's shown more rather than less. That's not how I want to say that.
It was more of a square than a circle, but sometimes it was a square.
I'll throw it to you again.
Okay.
Until recently, Raw's only bike was the Madonna, an aluminum heavy hitter with a lot of travel and a lot of capability. But what if you don't need all that? That's where the new Jib comes in. It's got 135 millimeters of travel, runs a 150 millimeter fork, and is rolling on 29-inch wheels. Raw describes it as bringing the Madonna's DNA to a more well-rounded package. First things first, just like the Madonna, Raw builds the Jib out of aluminum. And the finished product definitely has that industrial, ready-for-anything look. It also has what appears to be the largest main pivot on any bike ever. Cable routing is all external, and they're held in place by simple bolt-on clamps. Now those lines run along the top of the down tube, and that down tube is actually shaped with a concave at the bottom of it for the cables to sit in. At the back of the bike, you're going to find a post-mount setup for a 203 millimeter rotor. You'll also find a full set of ISCG tabs, boost hub spacing, and a threaded bottom bracket. Now the Jib may be a trail bike, but Raw definitely wanted some of the Madonna's DNA in here. And that's why this bike has 35 millimeters of static bottom bracket drop, the same as the much longer travel Madonna. Now, of course, you're going to be running less sag on this bike, so it's definitely going to be sitting a little bit higher. Reach numbers start off at 420 and they go out to 495 millimeters. This large size test bike, 470 millimeter front end. Chainstay lengths also grow as the size goes up. Now it starts off at 440 millimeters for the small and medium, 445 for this bad boy, and it goes up to 450 for the largest size. All right, it's time to talk about suspension, and the Jib uses a 4-bar system to deliver that 135 millimeters of travel. Raw says that it has a 15% change in leverage through the travel, and that means that the bike definitely works best with an air sprung shock like ours came fitted with, but you can definitely fit a coil over. Another thing to point out, sealed bearing shock mounts at both the lower and upper shock mount locations, and that should help that air shock feel very, very smooth. All right, if you're looking for your own Jib, well, Raw doesn't sell a complete bike, so you're gonna pick up a frame and shock only. Now, it's obvious that Raw has other things on their mind besides grams, but that doesn't mean that we get to skip talking about weight. This frame, without a shock, is 7.9 pounds. So as far as trail bikes go, it's not exactly a lightweight. But then again, that's not the goal here. All right, that is enough gibbering on for me. Let's talk to Kaz and Alicia and see what this bike is like on the trail. All right, so out of all the trail bikes here, Kaz, if I were just to guess, just by looking at them, I would assume that the Jib is the slowest climber. Would I be assuming incorrectly?
Yes, you'd be wrong. Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, who would have thought?
No, I mean, realistically, it does look like a big tank of a bike, but It doesn't ride like one. The weight is a little bit on the heavier side, but I got along with it well. It does have more of a ground hugging feel rather than something that just wants to accelerate and just super snappy sprinting. But there's not a ton of unwanted suspension movement, even with that Float X2. The suspension is very supple, but the position you're in, due to that steep seat-tube angle, it just helps it make sure that it's not just bobbing up and down when you don't want it to. Mm-hmm. There is a climb switch, but I really didn't need to use it much at all.
Yeah. Alicia, what did you think of the climbing, especially under power, out of the saddle? You're on a trail bike, you're faced with a big steep pitch. What does the Jib do?
It's actually surprisingly efficient. I, like you, looked at it and didn't think it was going to climb very well. And it wasn't the lightest bike on test, so it didn't exactly run up the hill, but it did skip along nicely, and it was pretty good. It was efficient. I didn't really reach for the climb switch at all for the most part.
Yeah. And what about in the tech stuff? Does it give you the traction that you need to get up those things, or something like the Ghost with the coil sprung shock? I would imagine that provides more traction when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, the geometry of the Jib helps out with that compared to the Ghost. The Ghost might be maybe a little more supple due to the coil shock, but this Float X2, and also the fact that Float X2 there's bearings at all points, so it's nice and supple, plenty of traction. It's been raining for, it feels like a month up here, so we take all the traction I can get. So it does very well in that department. And then the handling is, I call it extra neutral. You don't have to fight the bike to do anything. It's not the snappiest, but it's not sluggish, just kind of right in the middle of the road. It just kind of gets the job done. More kind of purposeful feeling rather than something that inspires you to just be a crazy sprinter.
Right, yeah. So in that tight stuff, Alicia, how would you compare it to the other bikes? It looks, like we've already mentioned, it looks like a big bike that's really made to go downhill. But when you get into that tight stuff, is it a handful or is it manageable?
It's pretty manageable. It's actually, for how burly it is, it's not very long and it's pretty nimble. And so it performs pretty well. Compared to like the Ghost, I think there's also a mental component where you get on the jib and it just feels pretty snappy and pretty enjoyable to ride, and it's more motivating than some of the other bikes on test.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of motivating, let's talk about the efficiency test for a minute. So Henry Quinney did all the bikes on the efficiency test. Out of the trail bikes, Kaz, where did that jib come in?
The jib tied for first place with the Stump Jumper Evo.
Who would have thought?
I was surprised.
I didn't think.
Yeah, but apparently it is extra efficient.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Okay, so the efficiency test is behind us. That brings us to the important part of the review, the descending. Casimir, the damn bike is called the Jib? You better be pretty damn jibby, right? Playful?
Not so much.
You weren't nose bonking
No,
everything, manualing everywhere?
It's like not a jib bike. It's kind of funny and people, even when it first came out, people would poke fun at the name a bit, but it's not a jib bike. And if I'm thinking of a bike for jibbing, people that don't know, that does mean kind of hopping and playing around, goofing off. You're going to probably want some smaller wheels, maybe a little bit shorter back end.
Maybe even the Score.
Right?
The Score might be a better jib bike, yeah. For this one, it just has that, it's very balanced, and it does very well in descents, but it's more of kind of a, just suck up all the bumps in a straight line. And it can turn as well, but it just doesn't have that snap that you might expect from a bike that's called the jib.
So Alicia, if it's not very jibby, what are the strengths of the bike? Where does it excel?
Well, it excels when it's really steep and rough. I first heard it on kind of flatter trails and I wasn't in love with it because it was so ground hungry that I felt like it was wanting to dive into all the holes rather than kind of hop over things the way I tend to prefer trail bikes. But once it was on the steep stuff, it was really, really great.
To be fair too though, their other bike, the Madonna, is probably more jibby than that.
It is more jibby than the Madonna. So yeah, if you're doing the comparison.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, it's more jibby. It does have a steeper head tube angle by 1.5 degrees. So it really is it's like a mini Madonna. Which, it's
Mini DH bike.
Yeah, we could call it that.
Do you think that with different suspension tuning, somebody could get this bike to be more playful, or is that something that's inherent in the design?
I think it's hard with the weight and just how solid the bike feels. It's so planted.
Yeah.
Its nature is good, but it's not jibby.
Yeah.
I think you could, maybe if you put like a Fox Float X on there, something along those lines. But either way, you still have moderately long chainstays. I think they're in the 443 realm, 445, somewhere around there. Your reach is moderate too. Head tube angle. It's all kind of like all these numbers that's not breaking any new ground, but I think it does it very well what it's designed for.
You guys both touched on something there, that the bike feels super solid when it's rough. Do you think that comes down to those big aluminum tubes and like the size of that main pivot? It's huge. Is that why it feels like that?
Potentially, yeah. It's a little overbuilt for what it is. It's a 135 bike, but it feels so much bigger than that, which is good. I think it feels really burly. It'll probably last for 100 years. And those bearings, they're oversized and they have bearing caps on them. Maintenance will probably be really easy.
Kaz, one thing I want to touch on, you mentioned to me actually out on the trail, is that you were wondering what the jib would feel like with a little bit slacker head angle, maybe a little less trail bikey.
Yeah, it's a tricky question because Raw already has the Madonna in their lineup. That's the 160 bike that has the slacker head angle, also has the more travel. But the way that this bike handles, it already does have that downhill hungry feel, just a little less travel. So yeah, I think for me, I kind of wouldn't mind if it had a little slacker head angle because it isn't your playful and lively bike that you would expect to go with those geometry numbers. So you might as well embrace it, I think. But as it is, it's still, I don't think that head angle really held it back very much either.
Yeah. Before we move on from descending, let's touch on timing as always. How did that go for you guys, Alicia? Where did the bike place in your downhill times?
It was one of my middle bikes, so not the fastest, not the slowest, just really efficient, pretty consistent, and I believe it was third.
Do you think your time, so both of you rode the Raw to third place, do you think that, you both talked a lot about how like the bike sort of like strikes middle ground with everything. And I don't think it's a coincidence, it's also sort of like right smack dab in the middle of the timing. It doesn't have any outstanding features that set it apart from something maybe, but it's also good at kind of all the things. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I think it's almost a boring bike, but it's not, because it's really just, it's like so purpose built. I think, in my notes somewhere I wrote like, this is a mountain bike with a capital M, capital B. It's like, you want a mountain bike? Well, here, there's this bike. It can go uphill, it can go downhill, does things well. It doesn't particularly shine in any one, but all of them kind of just like, it's just built to do this thing.
Now, you guys already mentioned that you get the jib as a frame only and you build it up how you want it. Ours obviously came as a complete bike, and we've got some stuff to talk about there, don't we?
I think for me, one thing about this bike was how quiet it was, and part of that is due to the Newman carbon wheels and the hub itself on them.
You don't like the buzz?
No, I love quiet wheels, and these ones are almost dead silent, just like a tiny and it's
Do you like the buzz?
I love the Newman wheels. I love the silence.
Oh. Alicia, you mentioned the brakes as well. Now, they were mostly trouble-free, but we've seen some issues with Shimano brakes over the past couple of years, and it looks like we're seeing them again.
Yeah, I mean, they do have the wandering bite point that you kind of come to expect with Shimano brakes. They work really well most of the time, so it's just that little bit of an issue. If they could make them consistent, they would be amazing.
Gaz, the last thing we should talk about, Fox dropper posts. We usually see these things running super smooth, no problems, but not the case here.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good luck with them. This one started getting a little bit sticky towards the top of its travel, last 20 millimeters or so. I have a strong suspicion that's due to the steady diet of mud and rain we've been feeding it.
So wet.
Yeah, so I think a little bit of lube, a little bit of maintenance will probably take care of it, but something worth noting, it's happened on a couple of the bikes here, but if you're riding in mud, pay a little bit more attention to those.
All right, we're gonna talk models and pricing, and unlike the other videos, this is a real quick section. Alicia?
Well, you get one option. It's a frame only for $2,600 US. And it's a little more money than you'll spend from some other companies for just a frame, but you get something really good, really well made, something burly that'll last a long time.
I also think it's neat that it's unique. It's not a giant, it's not a specialized, it's not a Trek. They make great bikes, but when was the last time you guys saw a Raw at the trailhead? You don't really see them anywhere, and I think that's something to call out. That's neat.
Yeah, we should mention that 2600 is with the Float X2. They do offer a bunch of different shock options, so be a little less if you just got the frame alone, but...
Right. That brings us to pros and cons next. Kaz, lead us off with the positive stuff first.
The pros, I think, is just how well-rounded it is. If you do want a burly trail bike, this bike, all the little details are taken care of. External cable routing, really simple, well-sealed bearings, just kind of a solid, robust bike.
Alicia, I'm gonna throw it to you for the negatives. Tell me what you didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, just to start off, it's not super light, so if you're looking for the ultra climber, that's not gonna be it. But also, it's not 100% well-rounded everywhere all the time. Like, there's some trails where it really excels and some trails where it just doesn't as much. I found that it got really bogged down in some of the corners and in holes on kind of flatter, more winding up and down trails. And I didn't love the way it would kind of want to be pumped really aggressively through everything. So if you're not a super aggressive rider, it is probably not for you, and it's definitely not for lazy riders. If you stop trying, it will stop moving.
Right. I think that's important to point out, because when I hear trail bike, I think of a bike that's kind of good everywhere. It excels at all the things, and that's not always the case. Some of these trail bikes they tend to excel a little more than other bikes in some places and a little less in other places. So
it'll do the things, you just have to really tell it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. All right, we're gonna wrap this review up by talking about who best suits the Raw jib. Casimir?
Yeah, I think we were talking about an aggressive rider, someone that's not afraid to push the bike a little bit. This bike does wake up the more you put into it. So lazy riders probably need not apply. Someone that's looking for the lightest bike, that's not gonna be it either, but somebody that wants something tough, reliable, and just kind of smack dab in the middle of road geometry, that's the Raw jib.
All right, that is it for the raw jib. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. Is this aluminum trail bike something you would consider, or are you looking for something less capable and lighter, maybe even more capable? And remember to subscribe so you don't miss any field test videos, and we'll see you next time.